Thank you, Chair. Minister, this is a really important issue in the Dublin West and Dublin 15 community, whereby NAMA seems to be allowing whoever owns the land that's under its jurisdiction to ask the local GAA club to move off that land. Just to give you very briefly background on this particular area, this is one of the most diverse areas in the whole of the country. It was also one of the worst planned areas in the entire country. Thanks to the state's failure, Fingal County Council and the state ultimately, who took a decision back in the late 90s to accept money from a developer in lieu of providing open space, an unprecedented decision. Then when prices of land crept up during the Celtic Tiger, it was impossible for the local authority to source any land for the local community, leaving a community of over 2,000 housing units with not a shred of grass, a blade of grass for the children to play on. It will definitely be an area for a tribunal of some kind in years to come. Meanwhile, the local community, through their own endeavours, managed to persuade the Twin Light developments, who are also responsible for seeking to evict tenants off their land, having sold the houses to a vulture fund, the same very developer. Meanwhile, the local community, the GAA club, used all of their efforts and goodwill to try to create pitches themselves, and they persuaded the developer to allow them use that. They got the council to back it. They raised the money, had all of the fundraisers, etc. So this is a pitch in front of the local schools. If this is lost to the community, there will be no GAA club in that area. It'll be gone. You can't actually have a club if you don't have pitches. They've also now been told that they will have an extension for a year. That's great, a stay of execution for a year. But what happens next year? Now, what needs to happen here? First of all, there's political decisions have left the community bereft of facilities. I was on the council when a decision was taken by political parties, who are now jumping up demanding action on this, to rezone that piece of land to local centre, making development of a commercial nature possible on that land. That decision never should have been taken, and it should be changed as well. But essentially what we need now, we need NAMA to be told not to allow any club be evicted from any land that it has an interest in. It's very clear to people that NAMA is only there to help developers, get cleaned up. It's not there to help communities, certainly. And while we're glad that we have an extension, we also need to make sure that pitches and facilities are provided for the local community. Twin Light developments have had their pound of flesh from this area. They sold thousands of houses during the boom, and they've maintained those homes with people renting in them at very, very generous rents. It's hardly too much to ask them to pass over this piece of land to the local community who've been left bereft of facilities. And the club and the whole community needs the support of this House to make sure that they get the facilities that they so desperately need.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. I am aware when I was given this, and I did contact the Taoiseach, and I've been made aware of some of the background. I think it is important, Deputy, to note that NAMA has a commercial remit and a statutory objective to obtain the best achievable return for the taxpayer. However, in the context of the commercial remit and consistent with Section 2 of the NAMA Act, it is at all times open to considering proposals aimed at contributing to broader social and economic objectives. I am informed by NAMA that the property in question is controlled by a receiver, Mr. Tom O'Brien of Mazars, with NAMA having secured an interest in the property. As the Deputy will appreciate, receivers are obliged to optimise the value of the property and other assets under control under Section 10 of the NAMA 2009 Act. NAMA is required to obtain the best achievable financial return for the state from its acquired loans and the properties that secure these loans, so that to the greatest extent possible, the debt outstanding against the assets can be repaid. Prior to the receiver's appointment over these lands, the property owner entered into an informal arrangement with Tyrrelstown GAA Club, which granted the club the use of the lands on a temporary basis free of charge. The agreement with the GAA Club was accepted as being no more than a temporary arrangement until such time as the owner of the land, now the receiver, determined the ultimate strategy for the land concerned. It is important to highlight that the site currently occupied by Tyrrelstown GAA Club is zoned for mixed-use development under the Fingal Development Plan. As a result, the long-term use of the site as a sports amenity is not currently possible unless the plan changes. As part of the zoning process for Tyrrelstown area, the property owner ceded 60 acres of the land to Fingal County Council for use for educational sites and amenity space, including playing fields. It is my understanding that Fingal County Council is currently developing the fields on this land, which are due to be completed in 2019. I'm advised that following discussions, the receiver has agreed to grant Tyrrelstown GAA Club a licence to continue to use the property for another 15 months to the end of May 2019, at which point alternative facilities should be available, and that this arrangement has been acceptable in principle by the GAA Club. The receiver has been reasonable in his dealings with the club, and is now a matter for the club to engage with Fingal County Council as regards the alternative facilities now being put in place that I mentioned earlier. While this is a positive development, it is important to reiterate that as NAMA does not own these properties, it is not in a position to compel debtors or receivers to sell their assets at less than the market value. While clearly NAMA is not in a position to give land or property, should a community group have an interest in a particular piece of land or property, or wishes to extend a sports pitch, it should speak in the first instance with the debtor or receiver who controls the land. Whilst working to obtain the best achievable financial return for the taxpayer, the NAMA board is open to proposals that achieve desirable social objectives in a manner that complements the objectives of other public bodies, including government departments, state agencies and local authorities. In line with this, NAMA has facilitated the sale of the land and property for a range of public uses, including schools, parks and healthcare facilities. NAMA also works with local authorities and other public bodies in the planning system to support the achievement of key objectives, including, for example, the provision of social housing and resolution of unfinished housing estates. To date, NAMA has facilitated the provision of almost 2,500 properties for social housing. I believe the approach determined by NAMA's board is contributing in terms of its primary commercial objective, while at the same time contributing to the achievement of wider public policy objectives.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, you have 2 minutes for a supplementary statement.
Minister, I'm thrilled to think that you think a receiver is being really reasonable for allowing this club to stay in the land for another year. Are you aware that it's the same receiver and the same owners of the land who are trying to evict dozens of families in Tyrrelstown from their homes? You think that's reasonable as well, do you? Like, there's nothing reasonable about the way Tyrrelstown has been misplanned and misdeveloped. This club has been very successful in providing a vital social service despite all of the odds. I mentioned about Tyrrelstown being a very diverse community. It also has needs. In order to provide cohesion in a community, you need sporting facilities, you need youth facilities. There's nothing for young people in this area. And as a result of that, there are, social issues and social problems where young people are becoming waylaid and misdirected because they don't have viable and proper outlets and amenities in the area, and the local community has paid the price for that. There's been a massive underinvestment in this area and in Dublin 15, and while the Taoiseach is boasting about all of the great resources that are going to be brought into Dublin West, there's huge chunks of Dublin West, like Tyrrelstown, Mulhuddard and many other areas, that are completely bereft of transport, of sporting facilities and of social facilities. You mention other pitches. The cricket club in Tyrrelstown, remember, you've got a huge number of Indian, Pakistani and other nationalities who want cricket facilities, and Ireland does quite well at cricket, hasn't been developed in Tyrrelstown either. There's a huge competition and demand for these pitches that you're talking about. And, Minister, I think I agree with you that it is very unfortunate that parties like yours, Fine Gael, Labour, decided to rezone that land and make it commercial. A strip of green in front of 2 schools shouldn't be for a commercial and local centre. The place is full of empty shops and empty buildings. The pub is closed down, the kitchen shop has just closed down, the furniture shop has just closed down, pharmacy may go. The idea that you need to evict a sports club
Thank you, Deputy.
to provide for commercial use is completely just outrageous, and it is not the case. And rather than supporting the receiver, it's not a great show of support for the local community in getting what they were let down by in the first place.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister, you have 2 minutes for a concluding statement.
Deputy, what I don't want to do is, I don't want to get into a bashing session in relation to the zoning. That's really a matter for Fingal County Council. So it is. So, I mean, if they want to change the zoning, it is a matter for the local authority and not for this House. I speak as the chairman of my local GAA club, and I'm well aware of the super facilities and the sports, as well as everything else that clubs bring. I'm not aware of GAA Tyrrelstown myself directly, but if the local authority have organised 60 acres for community and amenity space, well, certainly 60 acres is a lot of ground, and there should be space within that for pitches. That's the information that I have. 60 acres has been made available, as I read out in my speech earlier. Prior to the receiver's appointment of these lands, probably on into the sorry, hang on. I'm reading out the wrong section of it. There's 60 acres been made available to Fingal County Council, Deputy, and you know, that should be sufficient to meet the requirement of any GAA club and cricket club and others. So it is something that I support fully, rather than, and it's something that is happening in local authorities around the country, the convergence of facilities in one complex, in one space, under the auspices of the local authority. It has happened a lot in Dublin, hasn't happened as much in other local authorities around the country. But it is something that you can't ignore, that if there is a deal done, if there is arrangement in place, and if there is 60 acres available for amenity, and that's
sorry, Deputy.
And
sorry, Deputy, please allow the Minister to reply. Please, Deputy.
Well, I'm sorry, Deputy, I'm not.
Please, Deputy, allow the Minister.
So, I mean, you're talking about what hasn't been done, but you've chosen to ignore what I've read out, what has been done as well.
Please, Deputy, please. Thank you, Minister. Moving on to topical issue number 4, in the name of Deputy Michael